على سيد الرسل وخاتم الأنبياء وعلى آله الأزكياء وأصحابه الأتقياء أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي ورضيت لكم الإسلام دينا صدق الله العظيم. The day Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam received the first revelation in Ghar Hira was a turning point for humanity. Possibly one of the greatest moments in the existence of this earth. Jibreel alayhi salam came with the crown of prophethood one last time. And the venue that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose for this momentous occasion was very special. Out of all the stages of the world, out of all the famous locations that people had congregated at, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose the most isolated one, tucked far away. And there's a lesson for us here, and that lesson is that growth occurs and those special moments come to you when you are alone and most vulnerable. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam stepped away from society. He stepped away from Makkah Mukarramah where shirk was prominent. He pulled himself out of a world that was full of distractions where there's so much noise every day. The hustle and grind of life. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam withdrew from there and went into what he refers to as tahannuth. This was a practice among the Arabs that they would withdraw from society and spend time alone in seclusion, what we may understand to be somewhat of an i'tikaf, a seclusion. And in those moments when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is in Ghar Hira, he's connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, reflecting, doing dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's in that moment that he finds this great honor. And we find this within the teachings of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that on one side, the Prophet of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam encourages us and motivates us to be powerful, active members of society. The Prophet of Allah tells us to look after our brother, to look after our neighbor, to look after whoever is around us, Muslim or otherwise, that be there to contribute towards the betterment of humanity. Marry one another, build families, take care of your children, go to work and be just there. When you're in the public arena, guide the one that is lost. Lower your gaze from the one that is not dressed properly. When you're talking to people, be kind. Initiate salam when you talk to one another. But at the same time, where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam promotes community, he also instills within us the value of the individual. The community only exists if there are strong individuals that contribute to that community. When the Prophet of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam arrived in Medina Munawwara, Abdullah bin Salam radiallahu anh narrates this very famous and well-known narration. At this point, he is still a Jewish rabbi, hasn't accepted Islam yet. He's heard about this big arrival of the Prophet, this buzz that's going around Medina Munawwara. And in anticipation, he's hoping that he has the honor of laying his sight on the Prophet. So he's waiting until the Prophet of Allah arrives in Medina. And right when he looks at the Prophet, he says that I knew immediately this was not the face of a liar. He saw it in him. You know, game recognized game. When you see someone, you know what you see. He said, this man is not a liar, but now it was time to hear him. So he very carefully approached the Prophet of Allah, and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam spoke. And in his speech he said, Afshu salam, ayyuhan nas, Afshu salam, wa at'imu at-ta'am, wasilu al-arham, wa sallu bil-layli wan-nasu niyam, tadkhulu al-jannata bi-salam. Spread salam among one another. That when you see each other greet, some scholars translated this as peace, but probably the more common interpretation of the statement is the Muslim greeting of Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. That when you meet one another, greet one another. Because if you don't greet one another, you will enter into this very terrible state of society that you are with one another, but actually not with one another. You almost coexist, but there is no brotherhood. There is no real humanity there. And that's where we are, unfortunately, as a society. You can go to the masajid across America, and I'm sure it may be true for our own community that we're in today. that people have attended the same prayer hall for years on end and still do not know the names of the people that are standing to their left and right, behind them and in front of them. In a congregation of 500 people or 1,000 people, we may know the name of 15, 20 people within our communities. How does that happen? Well, there is negligence on our part, but we have to see the bigger picture here. We are unfortunately victims of a system that is created in the world that we live in. This is a part of the American life. You can go to the mall and spend 5 hours at the mall shopping and walk out from there not knowing the name of one person that you interacted with or walked past in those last 5 hours. Because this is a society that focuses on individualism. It's an individualistic society. And unfortunately, this has its pros, but many more cons. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam teaches us not to fall in this trap. That when you greet one another, when you see one another, make it more than just walking past. Don't be zombies that you put your shoes on within 2 feet of another Muslim. You actually lock eyes with one another without even nodding your head and saying, Assalamu alaikum. What kind of family are you? What kind of brothers are we? If a family existed like this, that would be a dysfunctional family. The parent would be terribly disappointed in their children that my children don't even greet one another. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us how to be family. Afshu salam. You say salam to one another. Don't think of where that person is from. Don't think of what language they speak. Forget about their skin tone or what they represent in that moment. Your job, if you know that person is a Muslim, to be proud and initiate Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Love is infectious. Once one person starts it, once a community, a few people in the community say, no, we will not be okay with this casual interaction that we have with one another. We want it to be meaningful. We want to build an ummah. And in those shoe racks, when we're walking out of here, we begin to hear the buzz of Assalamu alaikum, Assalamu alaikum. Others will also build the courage to say it to one another. And the beautiful thing about As-salam and how you know it's done right is that step 2 will occur. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, Afshu salam wa at'imu ta'am. How you know your greeting was meaningful is that at some point you will have a meal together. Because that relationship nurtures, it matures, it grows. If you're just saying salam to one another and it hasn't gone beyond that, you haven't asked about one another's families, even if it's weeks into it, even if it's years into it, if you haven't asked the other person, what do you do? Why don't you come over to my home? I can come over to yours. Or maybe the both of us can go over to Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts and grab ourselves a coffee. If the relationship hasn't matured on, we need to work on it. Afshu salam wa at'imu ta'am. The value of a person's salam will be seen very easily in whether that relationship matures or not. Then the Prophet of Allah teaches us, wasilul arham. This is the point of principle. The principle here is we can get caught with community activism and forget about our own homes. We're kind and we're promoting peace and unity across the world, that we want unity between this country and this country. We want peace in this part of the land. We want Muslims to unite there, here, and that nation, this nation. But we come back to our homes and unfortunately things are a hot cooking mess. Children are broken away. Fathers and mothers aren't talking to one another. Brothers and sisters can't look at each other in the eyes. We have so many family problems in the Muslim Ummah today. By Allah, someone asked me, what is the number one cause of children leaving Islam? I would say traumatic families they grew up with. That's what causes the number one problem of people leaving Islam. That when these children grow up, the first thing they want to do is walk away from whatever that was that they were in for the last 20 years of their life. All that pushing, all that shoving, all that posturing, all that forcing, all the trauma, all the foul language in the name of religion and God, I want nothing to do with it anymore. Bring me a family that raises their children in compassion and love and embeds it within Islam, embeds that bringing within Islamic values, and that when these children grow up, they see their parents love one another. They see their siblings are respectful to one another. They see their parents forgive their own siblings and are kind to their own parents. And they see this is the worldview that Islam offers. This is the structure Islam offers. Why would any sane human being ever walk away from this? It's a result of trauma built upon trauma built upon trauma. وَصَلُّوا بِاللَّيْلِ وَالنَّاسُ نِيَامٌ. There was a young man who was recently married, and yesterday I was talking with him. And my advice to him was, I said, look, everyone's going to give you a lot of advice on what to do in the early part of your marriage. You know, do this, do that. My simple advice to you just learn to love your spouse. Do things that are not normal to you. When you're sitting in the room and your wife's working on her computer and you're working on hers or yours, why don't you turn towards her and just say something nice, say I love you. Just compliment her on something. Because as guys, we're not used to complimenting one another. We view that to be, vulnerable. We view that to be cheesy and something doesn't come normally to us. But don't be like that with your own wife. Otherwise, what you have, the relationship you have with everyone in the world, will end up becoming the same relationship you have with the person that is closest to you and the one that you're most intimate with. I said to this person, are you not a student of knowledge? Do you not know how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam treated his wife? That he ate with Aisha radiallahu anha from the same plate? When will this sunnah ever be practiced? You may think it's mundane and useless, but it's not mundane. The messaging there is so powerful. Imagine a child sitting there seeing mom and dad in front of him, eating from the same plate, joyfully, jokingly feeding one another, sharing a cup, smiling and looking at one another. You have to understand the image that is captured in that person's heart and mind is so profound that there is no greater gift you can offer your child. Forget all the iPhones and iPads. They mean nothing. As far as they're concerned, when they come from a broken family and parents are giving them gifts, this is a form of hypocrisy. It's you paying a bribe for them to just go along with the charade that we have a play going on. You need to play your part. This is your contribution. Now make sure you do your part too. وَصَلُّوا بِاللَّيْلِ وَالنَّاسُ نِيَامٌ. The fourth thing the Prophet of Allah teaches us. So the first is أَفْشُ السَّلَامِ. The second is أَطْعِمُ الطَّعَامِ. Feed one another. صِلُوا الْأَرْحَامِ. Focus on your families. Parents, be kind to your children. Be loving, be nourishing, empowering. You have to understand, as your children get older, they now become independent. And that's what we want of them. How do you know you've raised a child? What is the bench that this is no longer a child and now an adult? If someone were to ask me, at what point does your child become an adult? I would have a simple answer. The moment they're independent. My youngest daughter is 4 years old. She needs me for everything she does. She can't wash herself after she uses the bathroom. She can't put her shoelaces on. She can't wake up in the morning. She can't brush her teeth. That is a pure child because she is absolutely dependent on her parent. Her mom and dad have to be there with her at every step of the way. We have to buckle her in and take her buckle out as well. But by the time my son's 12 years old, I have a son that's almost a teenager. Now that when he's at this age, I make it clear to him, I'm not putting your buckle on. I'm not taking it off. You're now heading towards adulthood. The bench to me, how I will know that you are an adult, is not by age. I don't care if you're 16 years old, 18 years old, 25 years old. You can become an adult in my eyes when you're 14 years old if you can cook, clean, clothe, wash yourself, and provide for yourself. The day you can take care of yourself, you are now effectively an adult. So as we raise our children and they reach adulthood, we as parents have a hard time accepting that. And we assume that we still have the same authority and influence that we have over our children when they're 4 years old. That authority is there, but it postures, it changes. It goes from dictating terms to now guiding and being a support and helping them make better decisions. And if you take this approach, you're not raising robots, rather you're raising respected, accountable, mature human beings who can now be active members to society. Look at Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. And if you're wondering where is this all coming from, it's coming from the Quran and Sunnah. It's coming from there. Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam sees a dream that he is sacrificing his son. Read the ayah of the Quran. Ya bunayya inni ara fil manami anni adbahuk. Oh my son, I saw, inni ara fil manam, I see in a dream, anni adbahuk, that I am verily sacrificing you. Fanzur madha tara. That's the next part. What do you think? He's a prophet, he's a father. He could just say, lie down, we're doing this now. But he empowers his son. He makes the decision his. So what does the son say? Based off of all the good decisions that he saw his father make and the results of those sacrifices that his father makes, he has an easy conclusion, Ya aba tif'al ma tu'mar. He doesn't say yes or no. He gives a principled answer that, oh my father, every time you did what you were commanded, things always worked out. So if'al ma tu'mar. Let's do that again. Let's do what you've been commanded. Satajiduni insha'Allahu min as-sabirin. You will find me to be a patient one. I will be patient with you. This is what we need to be doing within our households. Building love, building mahabba. And it's hard to understand that the people that are closest to us end up being the ones that get abused the most. There are studies conducted where people were asked that describe the first time you experienced trauma. Describe the most traumatic experience you've had in your life. And in most of those situations, it was from those that were closely related. The people who had sworn love, the people that had promised and vowed to love, were the ones that ended up inducing the most trauma on their own family members. What a horrible, miserable way to live life. And then we wonder, why is it that our families are falling apart? And why is it that we are struggling as an ummah? How can we go forward? Everything we're doing, if our nuclear families are broken, is secondary. Our institutions won't provide quality. Our communities won't be built on quality. Our leaders won't be of quality. The people who are working in the workforce are going to be half broken because at their feet they've been chopped right off. This all has to change. It all has to change. It needs to change right from its beginning. Go back to the example of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Look at what kind of father he was. When he's on his deathbed, Sayyidah Fatima radiallahu anha comes to visit him. Al-Mu'mineen Aisha radiallahu anha narrates the narration. She says the Prophet of Allah was lying and he was very ill, the final days of his life. Fatima radiallahu anha came to visit, she knocked on the door. It was the habit of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that when his daughter would come to visit, he would stand and greet her at the door himself. This was an occasion where he couldn't get up. He was too ill. So Aisha radiallahu anha says, Fatima radiallahu anha entered and she walked through the room right towards the Prophet of Allah. And listen to this word of hers. Aisha radiallahu anha says, I observed her walk, and her walk was the closest to Rasulullah I had ever seen. She walked just like her father. And she sat close to her father and held her father in her lap. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam saw her, and he pulled her in and he whispered in her ears that your Baba, your father, won't be here for too long. My time in this dunya has come to an end. She started crying profusely. Even though Rasulullah is leaving this dunya, like any father, he couldn't bear to stand seeing the flower of his heart, Az-Zahra, this beauty of his, this daughter of his, covered in tears. So he pulls her in a second time and says to her that, don't worry, you will be the first from my family to join me. And in one narration he said, does it not make you happy that Allah will make you the leader of the women of paradise? I mean, imagine hearing this, that you've been told that you will pass away soon. But for her, she smiled in that moment. She smiles because she knows this person that was her anchor in life, this person that was her support. You know, after Khadija radiallahu anha passed away, a little history for those of you that are not familiar, she passed away according to the most correct historical record in the 10th year after prophethood. Fatima radiallahu anha then got married in the 2nd year after Hijrah. For these 5 years, she had one parent alive, and that was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's a whole story there of what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did and how he built her and how he developed this beautiful daughter of his during these 5 years as that father. And all these memories are just gushing through her mind. Imagine her holding her father and remembering that he was the one that would sit her children on his lap and give the khutbah. He was the one that would let his children ride his shoulders. He was the one that would come to our house and say, Aina laka, where's the kid, where's the kid? And chase them around the house. Sayyida shababi ahlil jannah. He would kiss them and say, Ahabba Allahu man ahabba Hussain, fa inni uhibbuhu. May Allah love the one who loves your child, because I love him as well. The Prophet of Allah turns to his other son, Hassan radiallahu an, and said, his grandson, her son, that, you know, this son of mine, inna bani hada sayyid. This son of mine is a leader. And one day will come that he will bring truce between two great groups. Two groups will exist ready to go at each other, and this son of mine will bring truce. She's seeing it all. That one day there's a conflict between her and her husband, Ali radiallahu an. The Prophet of Allah comes home, he sees Fatima radiallahu anha there, and Ali radiallahu an is absent. So he asked, where is Ali? She said, O Messenger of Allah, we had a quarrel, so he left. The Prophet of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, He said to her, you stay here, let me solve this issue. He walked around Medina Munawwara looking for his son-in-law. Where is Ali? Where is Ali? And he asked, and they said, O Messenger of Allah, he's in the masjid. The Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam went to the masjid, and Ali radiallahu anhu was lying there with his head on the ground, kind of dusty. So the Prophet of Allah addresses him and says, Qum ya Aba Turab. Referring to that dusty, soily state he was in. He says, stand up, O man, of soil. And Ali radiallahu anhu stood up, and then Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam reconciled between the two. And for the rest of his life, Ali radiallahu anhu used to enjoy when people would call him Abu Turab. Even though it was connected back to that moment when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was reconciling at a point where his marriage is in some form of stress. But it was so special to him that the Prophet of Allah came to fix our affair. Ali radiallahu anhu desired to take on a second wife. The Prophet of Allah came to Ali radiallahu anhu and said to her, I'm not saying it's haram, but you have to understand, if you take on a second wife, it'll bring pain to my daughter. And anything that brings pain to her brings pain to me. So my request to you is, as long as my daughter is alive, don't take a second wife. A request. Ali radiallahu anhu obliged to this. While Fatima radiallahu anha was alive, he only kept one spouse. But after she passed away, then after that he acted upon the sunnah and practiced to the freedom that the Quran and sunnah had offered to him. The point being, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was a source of power to his family. And that's what we need in our community. That's what we need in our society. We need fathers and mothers who are not telling their children that they can't, rather they should be telling them they can. Showing them a dream. You know how you create champions in the world? How you create champions and leaders in the world is by finding people who can hype them up to be those champions at a young age. You need people who can go to them and say, you can do this. You need a father who can wrap his arm around his son and say, you can conquer the world, my du'as are with you, son, go. And even if you fail, I'm proud of you. If you get stuck, I want you to know I will be there to make dua for you. The mother kisses her child on the forehead before he goes to school and says, now go and seek knowledge, your mother's du'as are with you. Allah will open up doors. And even if that person fails, they'll fail with dignity and honor. That at the end of the day, my family was behind me. My father was the one that sent me off to America. I came to this land with his du'as. I came with my mother's du'as. And the fact that that is with me, all the storms of the world can come against me, we'll get through it. Because that vision, that person has been set on track by those who love them the most. We all need someone to inspire us. We all need someone to tell us you can. We all need someone to come and say to us that you will walk in Jannah one day as well. How do you think Bilal radiallahu anhu came Bilal? There was a movie that came out about Bilal radiallahu anhu some time back. It was a cartoon. My kid said to me, Baba, let's go watch it. I'm not really a movie person. They insisted, so I said, okay, I'll go with you. So we sat there, we watched it. When we came out, my son asked me, Dad, what do you think? I said to him, look, as far as a cartoon and a movie goes, it was decent. But there's one thing that I'm absolutely clear on. That movie was not about Bilal radiallahu anhu. It was about some dude called Bilal. It's not our Bilal. Because in that whole movie, while they're trying to talk about this person who they're calling Bilal, they've got the Umayyah bin Khalaf part right. They got the Battle of Badr part right. They got the Adhan part right. They got the part where he climbed the Kaaba and gave the Adhan. They got all that right. But there's one important detail they missed in that movie. They didn't mention the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there is no story of Bilal without the Prophet. There's no legacy of Bilal without the Prophet. That whole story starts with a slave who was met by a prophet who said, you can, and you will, and I'm with you, and I trust you, and be patient, and you will do this. And Bilal, I heard your footsteps in Jannah. And Bilal, you will call the Adhan. And Bilal this, and Bilal that. And the one who walked Bilal through life until the point that where he's on his deathbed, he's crying in pain, and his wife is crying. He's in pain. His wife is crying, wa karbah, wa karbah. And he says to his wife, don't lament and remorse at my death. Wa farha. I'm happy. Why? غَدًا نَلْقَى مُحَمَّدًا. Tomorrow I will meet with the Prophet of Allah. It's been too long since I've laid my eyes on him. Since the day he's passed away, life has been very miserable and hard. For these people, everywhere they looked, they saw the face of the man who lifted them, who empowered them. This is what we need in our ummah today. This is what we need in our community. We don't need any more negativity. It's done. It doesn't work. And if that isn't clear to you after 10 years of parenting, then I don't know what to say anymore. What I have to say is that the method of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam works. He was not a naysayer. He was not a nagger. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam wasn't a negative person. He always empowered people. He never ever made anyone feel bad about himself. There are no instances where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's words led to a person crying. Never. He never hurt a person in his life. He never struck a person with his life. The riwayah of Anas bin Malik radiallahu anhu. He never struck his wife in his life, never raised his voice against them. This was the person that we're talking about. This is our leader and our master and our prophet. And until we don't understand that, we have a hot mess to deal with. I will conclude this discussion of ours with one more time, just reading that hadith. Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam said, Afshu salam, spread salam. At'imu ta'am, feed one another. Silul arham, mend your family ties. Wasallu bil layl, and pray during the night hours when nasu niyam, while people sleep. Tadkhulul jannata bi salam, you will enter into paradise with peace. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept and grant us tawfiq, himma and strength. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspire us, take us by our forelock to His obedience, make our family unit strong, and give strength to this ummah. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Inna Allah wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabi. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. Allahumma salli ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali sayyidina Muhammad. كلما ذكره الذاكرون وكلما غفل عن ذكره الغافلون. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما يا رب العالمين. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وبارك لنا فيما أعطيت وقنا واصرف عنا برحمتك شر ما قضيت فإنك تقضي ولا يقضى عليك إنه لا يذل من واليت ولا يعز من عاديت تبارك ربنا وتعاليت فلك الحمد على ما قضيت ولك الشكر على ما أنعمت به وأوليت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصلى الله على النبي الأمي سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.